The bullet that grazed Ethan Rourke's shoulder in the spring of 1878 didn't hurt nearly as much as the loneliness that had settled into his bones over the past 3 years. He stood on the wide porch of his ranch house outside McGill, Nevada, watching the sun bleed orange across the desert horizon, one hand pressed against the bandage beneath his shirt. The wound was nothing serious, just a reminder that even checking fence lines near the mountain passes could turn dangerous when rustlers were about. His cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, hundreds of head that represented years of backbreaking work. The ranch sprawled across thousands of acres of high desert, sagebrush rolling toward distant peaks still capped with snow. He had everything a man could want, except someone to share it with. Ethan was 32 years old, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His wife Sarah had died 3 years ago during childbirth, taking their unborn son with her. Since then, the ranch house had echoed with silence. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, came during the days, but the nights stretched endless and hollow. The sound of a wagon rattling up the long drive pulled him from his thoughts. Doc Patterson's buggy, unusual at this hour. Ethan walked down the porch steps, his boots crunching on the hard, packed earth. "Doc," Ethan called out, shoulders healing fine. "You didn't need to come all the way out here." The elderly doctor climbed down, his weathered face creased with concern. "Not here for you, Ethan. Got a favor to ask. Big one." Ethan waited, sensing something heavy in the old man's tone. "Got a woman in town. Been there about a week, staying in the boarding house. Name's Grace Mitchell. She's in a bad way, Ethan. Not sick, not exactly." Doc Patterson removed his hat, working the brim in his hands. "She's running from something. Won't say what, but I've been a doctor 40 years and I know terror when I see it. She needs to disappear for a while, somewhere remote, somewhere safe. And you thought of my ranch. You've got the space, the isolation, and you're a good man." Doc Patterson's eyes held a pleading look. "She's got money to pay for room and board. She just needs time to figure things out, somewhere no one will think to look." Ethan's first instinct was to refuse. The last thing he needed was complications, a strange woman bringing her troubles to his doorstep. But he remembered Sarah's voice, the way she'd always insisted on helping anyone who needed it, and the house was so damned quiet. "Bring her out tomorrow," he said finally. "We'll see how it goes." Doc Patterson's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, Ethan. You won't regret this." But Ethan wondered if he already did. The next afternoon, Ethan stood in his parlor, having asked Mrs. Chen to prepare the guest room upstairs. The Chinese woman had raised her eyebrows at the news but said nothing, simply nodding and setting about her work with characteristic efficiency. The room hadn't been used since Sarah's mother visited 2 years ago, and it took some effort to make it welcoming again. When the buggy arrived, Ethan walked outside, squinting against the bright Nevada sun. Doc Patterson helped a woman down, and Ethan got his first look at Grace Mitchell. She was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark blonde hair pulled severely back from a face that might have been pretty if not for its complete lack of expression. She wore a plain gray dress, travel-worn but respectable, and carried a single carpet bag. What struck him most were her eyes, a light green like sage after rain, completely empty of emotion. She looked at the ranch, the house, and finally at him with the same blank stare. "Miss Mitchell," Ethan said, stepping forward, "I'm Ethan Rourke. Welcome to my ranch." She nodded once but said nothing. Her face remained carefully neutral, not hostile but not friendly either. It was as if she'd removed herself entirely from the present moment. Doc Patterson cleared his throat. "Miss Mitchell, Mr. Rourke has generously agreed to let you stay here as long as you need. You'll be safe here." "Thank you," she said, her voice flat and colorless. She didn't smile, didn't show any hint of gratitude or relief, just those two words delivered like a recitation. An awkward silence stretched between them. Ethan glanced at Doc Patterson, who shrugged helplessly. "Well," Ethan said finally, "let me show you to your room. You must be tired from the ride." Grace followed him into the house, her footsteps quiet on the wooden floors. He led her upstairs, acutely aware of her presence behind him, this strange woman who refused to show any emotion at all. The guest room was at the end of the hall, sunny and clean, with lace curtains that Sarah had made years ago. "Bathrooms down the hall," Ethan explained. "We've got running water, one of the few ranches out here that does. Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper, comes every day except Sunday. She'll prepare meals. If you need anything, just ask." Grace set her carpetbag on the bed and surveyed the room with that same blank expression. "It's fine, thank you. Miss Mitchell, I know this is strange for both of us, but you're safe here. Whatever you're running from, it won't find you on this ranch." For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or pain. But then it was gone, replaced by that careful emptiness. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Rourke." "Ethan, just Ethan." She nodded but didn't offer her own first name in return. Ethan left her to unpack, walking back downstairs where Doc Patterson waited. "What happened to her?" Ethan asked quietly. The doctor shook his head. "She won't say. Showed up in McGill on the stage from Salt Lake City. No one met her, and she went straight to the boarding house. Mrs. Ferguson said she hasn't smiled once, barely speaks, just pays her rent and keeps to herself. But Mrs. Ferguson heard her crying at night and once saw bruises on her wrists before Miss Mitchell pulled her sleeves down." Ethan felt anger kindle in his chest. "A man did this to her." "That would be my guess. But until she's ready to talk about it, all we can do is give her space and safety." Doc Patterson put his hat back on. "Thank you again, Ethan. You're doing a good thing." After the doctor left, Ethan stood in his empty parlor, listening to the quiet movements from upstairs. He'd thought his life couldn't get more complicated than running a ranch alone while nursing old grief. Apparently, he'd been wrong. The first few days passed in awkward silence. Grace appeared at mealtimes, ate without comment, and disappeared back to her room. She never smiled, never showed any expression beyond that careful blankness. Mrs. Chen tried to engage her in conversation, but Grace's responses were minimal, polite but completely closed off. Ethan watched her, curious despite himself. She moved like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible, always quiet, always careful. She sat at the table with her hands folded in her lap, never reaching for anything until it was passed to her. It reminded him of a wild animal trying to appear invisible. On the fourth day, he found her on the back porch in the early morning, staring out at the desert. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, and the air held that perfect coolness that would burn off by midday. She stood very still, her arms wrapped around herself despite the shawl over her shoulders. "Morning," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. She turned her head slightly, acknowledging his presence but not quite looking at him. "Good morning, Mr. Rourke. You can call me Ethan. I know I mentioned that before. It wouldn't be proper." "Well, there's not much proper about this whole situation, is there?" He leaned against the porch railing. "You don't have to stay locked in your room all day, you know. The ranch is yours to explore. Might do you good to get some air." "I don't want to be in the way." "You're not. Place is big enough for both of us and then some." She said nothing, just turned back to the sunrise. Her profile was sharp against the brightening sky, and Ethan noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her own arms like she was holding herself together by force. "Miss Mitchell, I'm not going to pry into your business. Doc Patterson asked me to give you a safe place, and that's what I'm doing. But your wound's so tight I'm afraid you're going to snap. Whatever happened, you're away from it now." "Am I?" The words came out bitter, the first real emotion he'd heard from her. "Do you ever really get away from the past, Mr. Rourke? Or does it just follow you in different forms?" Before he could answer, she walked back inside, leaving him alone with the sunrise and more questions than before. The incident with the horses happened on her 8th day at the ranch. Ethan was in the main corral, working with a young stallion he'd been training. The horse was spirited, fighting the saddle, and Ethan was so focused on the animal that he didn't notice Grace had come outside until he heard her sharp intake of breath. The stallion had decided he'd had enough, rearing and bucking. Ethan held on, keeping his seat through long practice, but he saw Grace rush forward, reaching for the corral fence as if she could somehow help. The movement spooked the horse further, and it bucked harder, slamming Ethan against the fence rail before he could correct. He managed to dismount in a controlled fall, rolling away from the thrashing hooves, his ribs screaming. The stallion galloped to the far end of the corral, snorting and tossing his head. "God, I'm sorry," Grace said, and her voice actually held emotion now, thick with guilt and fear. "I shouldn't have moved. I startled him. Are you hurt?" Ethan got to his feet slowly, testing his ribs. "Bruised probably, but nothing broken." "I'm fine. Horse is still learning, not your fault." But Grace's carefully maintained composure had cracked. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. "I'm always causing problems. I should never have come here. I'll pack my things." "Hey, hold on." Ethan climbed out of the corral, moving carefully. "It was an accident. The horse was already worked up. You didn't cause anything." "Yes, I did. I always do." Her voice was rising, panic bleeding through. "Everything I touch falls apart. Everyone around me gets hurt. I should have stayed in Salt Lake City. I should have, Grace." He used her first name deliberately, trying to cut through her spiral. "Stop. Take a breath." She did, her chest heaving. For a moment he thought she might cry, but instead her face smoothed back into that careful blankness, the mask sliding back into place. "I apologize for the outburst. If you'll excuse me." She turned to leave, but Ethan caught her arm gently. She flinched at the contact, and he immediately let go, cursing himself. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have grabbed you, but please don't run off. You're not causing problems. You're welcome here." She stood frozen, not looking at him. "Why are you being kind to me? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." "I don't need to know. Everyone deserves a second chance, a safe place. And whatever you think you've done, I'm guessing you're being harder on yourself than you deserve." Finally, she looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw the depth of pain in those green eyes. "You don't know that. Maybe not. But I know that you've been here over a week and you haven't caused a single problem. You've been quiet and polite and so careful not to take up space that you're practically invisible. That's not someone who causes trouble. That's someone who's been hurt." For a long moment, they stood there in the Nevada sun, the wind carrying the scent of sage. Then Grace's shoulders sagged, some of the tension leaving her body. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Rourke. I'll try not to waste it." She walked back to the house, and Ethan watched her go, rubbing his sore ribs. Whatever had happened to this woman, it had carved something essential out of her. He recognized that kind of damage. He'd seen it in the mirror for months after Sarah died, that same careful emptiness, the feeling that if you didn't let yourself feel anything, you couldn't be hurt anymore. That night at dinner, Grace surprised him by speaking first. "Mrs. Chen tells me you run this ranch mostly by yourself." Ethan looked up from his plate. Mrs. Chen, stirring something at the stove, shot him a meaningful glance. "That's right. I've got a few hands who come up from McGill when I need extra help with branding or moving cattle, but day to day, it's just me. That's a lot of work for one person. Keeps me busy." Rather be busy than sitting around thinking too much. Something flickered in her eyes, understanding maybe. I know what you mean. Back in Salt Lake City, I worked in a dress shop. The owner, Mrs. Pemberton, she was kind. Let me work long hours when I needed to. Said I was the best seamstress she'd ever had. It was the most personal information she'd shared since arriving. Ethan set down his fork, not wanting to spook her into silence. You're good with a needle. It's one of the few things I am good at. My mother taught me when I was young. She said a woman should always have a trade, something that was hers alone. Grace's voice softened slightly. She died when I was 16. I'm sorry, that's young to lose your mother. Yes. Grace looked down at her hands. My father remarried quickly. His new wife didn't care for me much. I left home at 18, found work at the dress shop. Mrs. Pemberton became like family. Is she the one you're running from? Ethan asked gently. Grace's face shuddered closed immediately, the mask slamming back into place. No, may I be excused? Of course. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. She left the table without another word, her footsteps quick on the stairs. Mrs. Chen tusked softly, shaking her head at Ethan. Too much, too fast, the older woman said in her accented English. Frightened bird need patience. I know, I just thought you thought wrong. Girl has secrets, bad ones. Let her tell when ready. Ethan pushed his food around his plate, his appetite gone. Mrs. Chen was right, of course. He needed to be patient. But something about Grace's pain called to his own made him want to help her in a way he hadn't wanted anything in years. It was alarming and confusing, and he didn't know what to do with it. The following week brought a letter from town. One of Ethan's ranch hands, Jack Weber, rode out from McGill with the mail and some supplies. Ethan met him by the barn, helping unload sacks of grain and flour. Heard you've got company, Jack said, his tone carefully neutral. The man was in his 50s, reliable and discreet, which was why Ethan had trusted him for years. News travels fast. Always does. Doc Patterson mentioned you were helping someone out. None of my business, but thought you should know there's been a man asking questions in town. Ethan went still. What kind of questions? About a woman matching Miss Mitchell's description. Said she was his wife, that she'd run off in a state of confusion. He was real worried about her, real concerned. Jack's tone made it clear what he thought of the man's concern. Smooth-talking fellow, well-dressed, had money by the looks of him, but something about him didn't sit right. Did you tell him anything? Hell no. Played dumb, like I didn't know nothing about nothing. But he's staying at the hotel, asking around. If he's persistent, someone might talk eventually. Ethan cursed under his breath. Thanks for the warning, Jack. Keep your ears open, will you? Let me know if he's still hanging around. Will do, boss. Jack tipped his hat and rode back toward town. Ethan found Grace in the garden behind the house. Mrs. Chen had planted vegetables there years ago, and someone needed to maintain it. Grace had taken on the task without being asked, and now she knelt between rows of tomatoes and squash, pulling weeds with methodical precision. She'd rolled up her sleeves, and he could see her forearms, pale skin marked with faded bruises, yellowing now but still visible. Grace, I need to talk to you. She looked up and, seeing his expression, got to her feet quickly. What's wrong? There's a man in McGill asking about you. Says he's your husband, that you ran off and he's worried. All color drained from her face. Her legs seemed to give out and she sat down hard on the garden bench, her hands gripping the edge until her knuckles turned white. He found me. God, he found me already. Ethan sat beside her, keeping a careful distance. Is he your husband? Yes. No, I don't know any more. Her voice was shaking. We were married 2 years ago. His name is Curtis Mitchell. He was charming at first, attentive. I thought I was lucky, but after the wedding he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. Did he hurt you? Ethan kept his voice level, but rage was building in his chest. Grace laughed, a bitter sound devoid of humor. Hurt is such a simple word for what he did. He controlled everything. What I wore, where I went, who I spoke to. He said it was because he loved me, because he wanted to protect me. But if I did something he didn't like, if I spoke out of turn or failed to smile when he wanted, he would. She trailed off, pulling her sleeves down to cover her arms. He was always careful, never anywhere that would show. And afterward, he'd apologize, bring me flowers, tell me he only did it because I'd upset him, that if I tried harder to be a good wife, he wouldn't have to correct me. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. How did you get away? He left for a business trip to San Francisco. I had 2 weeks. I took what money I'd hidden away, pennies saved here and there, and I bought a ticket on the first stage out. I thought Salt Lake City was far enough. I thought he wouldn't bother looking for me there. I was so stupid. You're not stupid. You're brave. You got away from him. For what? A few weeks. He'll find me here, Ethan. He always finds me when I try to leave. I tried once before, made it to my friend's house. He showed up with flowers and apologies, convinced everyone I was hysterical, that I'd been confused. He was so convincing, so charming. And then he took me home and made sure I understood what happened to wives who embarrassed their husbands. Tears were streaming down her face now, the first real emotion she'd shown beyond that careful blankness. Ethan wanted to reach for her to offer comfort, but he was afraid of scaring her more. Listen to me, he said firmly. You're not going back to him. I don't care how charming he is or what story he tells. You're staying here and you're safe. I give you my word. You can't stop him. He has money, influence. He'll go to the law, say I'm his property. You're not property. You're a human being who deserves to be treated with respect and kindness. And out here, the law is flexible. A man's ranch is his own kingdom, and I say who's welcome on mine. Grace looked at him with those haunted eyes. Why would you do this for me? Risk trouble with someone like Curtis? Because it's the right thing to do, and because... He paused, trying to find the words. Because I know what it's like to lose yourself in grief and pain. After my wife died, I walked around like a ghost for a year. I stopped feeling anything because feeling hurt too much. I see that same look in your eyes, Grace. That same careful emptiness, like if you don't feel anything, you can't be hurt anymore. But that's not living. That's just surviving. And you deserve more than that. She was quiet for a long moment, tears still tracking down her face. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she said, I don't remember how to be anything else. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. But first, we need to deal with Curtis. He doesn't know you're here yet. As long as we're careful, we can keep it that way. He won't give up. He'll turn over every stone until he finds me. Then we'll make sure he looks everywhere except here. Ethan stood, his mind already working through the problem. Stay out of sight when anyone comes to the ranch. If he does somehow show up, you hide. I'll handle him. I don't want you getting hurt because of me. I won't, but I'm not letting him take you either. He looked down at her, this broken woman who'd stumbled into his life and somehow become important in just a few short weeks. You don't have to pretend here, Grace. You don't have to smile when you're sad or act like everything's fine when it's not. You can just be yourself, whatever that looks like right now. You're safe here, I promise you that. For the first time since she'd arrived, something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not yet, but a softening. A tiny crack in the armor she'd built around herself. Thank you, she whispered. For seeing me. For believing me. Curtis always said no one would believe me, that everyone would think I was crazy or hysterical. Then Curtis is a liar as well as a coward. Any man who has to hurt a woman to feel powerful is no man at all. Grace wiped her eyes with her sleeve, taking a shaky breath. What do we do now? Now, you go inside and help Mrs. Chen with dinner. Try to keep to your normal routine. I'm going to ride into town tomorrow, talk to the sheriff. Cal Henderson's a good man. He'll understand the situation. Will he help? I'm legally married. Curtis has rights. Curtis has nothing. Marriage doesn't give a man the right to beat his wife. It never has, no matter what the law says on paper. And out here we take care of our own. You're under my protection now. That means something in McGill. The next morning, Ethan rode into town, the early sun already promising another scorching day. McGill was a small ranching community, barely more than a main street with a handful of stores, a church, a hotel, and 2 saloons. The silver mining boom had passed it by, leaving it to the cattlemen and the stubborn souls who loved the harsh desert beauty. He found Sheriff Cal Henderson in his office, a small building next to the general store. Cal was a few years older than Ethan, a former Texas Ranger who'd settled in Nevada looking for a quieter life. He'd been a friend since Ethan first moved to the area 8 years ago. "Ethan," Cal greeted him, looking up from paperwork. "Heard you've got a house guest." "That's what I need to talk to you about." Ethan closed the door and took a seat. "Her name's Grace Mitchell. She's running from her husband, a man who's been beating her. He's here in town looking for her." Cal's expression hardened. "Curtis Mitchell. Yeah, I met him. Smooth character, well-dressed, talking about his poor, confused wife. Said she's not well in the head, that she runs off sometimes when her nerves get bad. It's all lies. He's been hurting her, controlling her. She finally got the courage to run, and now he's hunting her down." "You sure about this, Ethan? Mitchell's got money, seems respectable. You're taking a woman's word against her husband's." "Yes, I'm sure. You should see the bruises on her arms, Cal, and the way she flinches at loud noises, the way she can barely look anyone in the eye. That's not mental illness. That's abuse." Cal leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan carefully. "This getting personal for you. It's personal because it's happening on my land to someone under my protection. Are you going to help or not?" "Easy, friend. I'm on your side. Just needed to know the truth of it." Cal pulled out a ledger. "Mitchell's staying at the hotel. He's been asking questions all over town, but so far no one's told him anything useful. Most folks don't trust outsiders, especially slick ones like him, but he's persistent. Eventually, someone might talk. What can we do legally?" "Not much, if I'm honest. She's his wife. The law's on his side, even if morality isn't. But the law's a long way from McGill, and I'm the one who enforces it here. If she doesn't want to go with him, I can make sure he understands that trespassing on private property is a serious offense. Especially armed trespassing. He'd be armed, man like that. Probably carrying something fancy and expensive. Won't make him any less dead if he pushes his luck on a Nevada ranch." Ethan understood what Cal was saying without saying it. Out here, justice was often handled privately, away from courts and judges. It wasn't something Ethan wanted, but it was good to know the option existed. "I just want her left alone," Ethan said. "She's been through enough. Then I'll have a talk with Mr. Mitchell. Encourage him to move his search along to other towns. Maybe suggest his wife headed east toward Ely or even back toward Salt Lake City." "Thank you, Cal. Just keep her out of sight for a while. And Ethan, be careful. Men like Mitchell, they don't like losing things they consider theirs. He might smile and nod and then come at you sideways." Ethan left the sheriff's office and headed to the general store for supplies. The proprietor, Mr. Hanson, was a talker, and Ethan endured 20 minutes of gossip about everyone in town before he could make his escape. As he loaded his wagon, a well-dressed man approached from the hotel across the street. "Excuse me," the man called out. "Might I have a word?" Ethan turned, already knowing who this was. Curtis Mitchell was handsome in a polished way, with dark hair slicked back and a suit that probably cost more than most McGill residents made in a year. His smile was practiced, charming, the kind of smile that convinced people to trust him. "Can I help you?" Ethan kept his voice neutral. "I'm Curtis Mitchell. I'm looking for my wife, Grace. She's been missing for several weeks and I'm terribly worried. I heard you might have seen her. A woman matching her description. Can't say I have. What makes you think she'd be out this way?" Curtis's smile never wavered. "I've been searching everywhere. Grace is not well, you understand. She suffers from nervous complaints, sometimes gets confused. I'm desperate to find her before she comes to harm." "That's rough. Hope you find her, but I haven't seen any strange women around. Good day." Ethan turned back to his wagon. "Wait." Curtis's voice sharpened slightly. "You run a ranch outside town, correct? Perhaps she sought work there. She's excellent with a needle, often takes on sewing work. My housekeeper handles all that, and I'd know if there was a strange woman on my property. Like I said, haven't seen anyone matching that description." Curtis studied him for a long moment, and Ethan met his gaze steadily. Behind the charming smile, Curtis's eyes were cold, calculating. This was a man used to getting what he wanted, and Ethan could see the flash of anger when he realized he wasn't going to get it here. "If you do happen to see her," Curtis said slowly, "there's a reward for information leading to her safe return. $50. That's generous." "But I can't help you." Ethan climbed onto his wagon and drove away, feeling Curtis's stare on his back the whole way out of town. That night, he told Grace about the encounter. They sat in the parlor after dinner, the windows open to catch the evening breeze. Grace had been tense all day, knowing Ethan was going to town, knowing Curtis was there. Now she sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisted in her lap. "What did he look like?" she asked quietly. "Did he seem angry?" He was playing a part, the concerned husband, all worried and charming. "But I saw what was underneath. He's cold, Grace, and he's not going to give up easily." She closed her eyes. "I know. He's patient. He'll wait, watch, follow any lead. That's what he did last time. He waited outside my friend's house for 3 days before approaching, just watching. He won't find you here. We just need to be careful. For how long? I can't hide forever, Ethan. And I can't let you risk your life for me indefinitely. This isn't your problem. You're not a problem." He leaned forward, catching her gaze. "And I'm not doing this out of obligation. I'm doing it because I want to. Because you deserve safety and peace, and I'm in a position to provide it. So please stop talking about leaving, at least until we figure out a permanent solution." "What kind of solution?" "I don't know yet, but we'll find one." He hesitated, then added, "How did you end up married to him in the first place? You said he was charming at first." Grace was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was distant, remembering. "I was lonely. After my father remarried, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere." Curtis came into Mrs. Pemberton's shop to order shirts. He was handsome, successful. He paid attention to me, said I was beautiful, special. No one had ever made me feel that way before. When he proposed after 3 months, I said yes. I thought it was romantic that he was so sure of his feelings. I didn't realize it was about control. What changed after the wedding? Everything. Suddenly, my job wasn't appropriate for his wife. My friends were unsuitable. The way I dressed, spoke, even laughed, it all needed to be corrected. At first, it was just criticism. Constant comments about how I could be better, how I needed to try harder. Then it escalated. The first time he hit me, I was so shocked I couldn't even react. Afterward, he cried, said he'd never do it again. But he did. Again and again. And each time he found a way to make it my fault. Ethan felt sick listening to her story. Did you have anyone you could turn to? He'd isolated me by then. My friends had stopped calling after he was rude to them enough times. Mrs. Pemberton tried to check on me once, but Curtis answered the door, told her I was ill and couldn't receive visitors. After that, He watched me constantly. I couldn't leave the house without him. The only freedom I had was when he traveled for business. That's when I started hiding money, planning my escape. You were brave to leave. I was desperate. There's a difference." She looked up at him, and in the lamplight her face was younger, more vulnerable. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the hitting, not the control. It was the way he made me doubt myself. He'd tell me I was crazy, that I was imagining things, that I was too sensitive. After a while, I started to believe him. I thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe if I tried harder was better, he wouldn't have to hurt me anymore. That's what men like him do. They break you down until you can't trust your own thoughts. But you're not crazy, Grace. You're not too sensitive. You're a woman who was trapped in an impossible situation, and you found the courage to escape. That takes more strength than most people will ever need." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't feel strong. I feel broken, like something essential inside me shattered, and I don't know how to put it back together." "Maybe you don't put it back the way it was. Maybe you build something new, something stronger." Ethan surprised himself with the words, realizing he was talking to himself as much as to her. "After Sarah died, I thought my life was over. I went through the motions, but I wasn't really living. Somewhere along the way, I stopped even trying. But these past few weeks, having you here, it's reminded me that life goes on, that there's still purpose and meaning to be found." Grace wiped her eyes. "Thank you for telling me about your wife. I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry for what you've been through. But we're both still here, still breathing. That counts for something." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of the desert drifting through the windows. Crickets chirped, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was peaceful, and Ethan realized he hadn't felt this kind of contentment in years. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Curtis remained in McGill, asking questions, but Sheriff Henderson made sure he didn't get any useful answers. Meanwhile, Grace began to emerge from her shell, bit by bit. She helped Mrs. Chen with cooking and household tasks. She tended the garden, coaxing vegetables from the dry soil with surprising skill. She even started joining Ethan on his morning rides around the property, sitting beside him on the wagon as he checked fence lines and water sources. It was during one of these rides that things shifted between them. They'd stopped at a high point on the ranch, looking out over the vast expanse of desert and distant mountains. The land was harsh and unforgiving, but there was a beauty to it that Ethan had always loved. "It's so big," Grace said softly, "so open. Sometimes in Salt Lake City, I felt like the buildings were closing in on me, suffocating me. But out here I can breathe. That's why I love it. Out here you can see trouble coming from miles away, and there's no one to tell you how to live your life or who to be." Grace turned to him. "Is that why you stayed after your wife died? Because you needed the space to grieve, partly. And partly because Sarah loved this place. Giving it up would have felt like losing her all over again." He paused. "She would have liked you, I think. She was always bringing home strays, people who needed help. Drove me crazy sometimes, but it was part of who she was." "What was she like? Strong? Stubborn?" "She grew up on a ranch in Montana, knew cattle and horses as well as any man. When we met, I was working on her father's spread. She told me later that she'd decided I was worth marrying the day she saw me refuse to break a horse using harsh methods. Said any man patient enough to train an animal with kindness was worth knowing. She sounds wonderful, she was, but she's gone, and I'm still here." For a long time, I couldn't reconcile those two facts, couldn't figure out how to move forward without feeling like I was betraying her memory. And now, Ethan looked at Grace, really looked at her. The sun caught the gold in her hair, and her green eyes were clearer now, less haunted than when she'd first arrived. "Now I think she'd be angry with me for wasting so much time being miserable. Sarah believed in living fully, in grabbing happiness wherever you could find it. She wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life alone. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Grace's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked away, but not before Ethan saw the answering warmth in her eyes. "We should head back," she said quietly. "Mrs. Chen will worry." But as they drove back to the ranch house, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the way Grace had looked at him and the way his heart had sped up when she did. It was dangerous, letting himself feel anything for her. She was vulnerable, running from a violent husband in no position to make decisions about her heart. And yet, he couldn't deny the connection growing between them. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan sat on the front porch with a whiskey. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the black sky. He heard the door open behind him and wasn't surprised when Grace joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the desert night chill. "Can't sleep," she asked. "Too much on my mind." "You?" "Same." She sat in the chair beside him. "I heard you moving around and thought you might like company." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Grace said, "Ethan, can I ask you something? Anything? Why haven't you remarried? It's been 3 years and you're a good man with a successful ranch. There must have been women interested. None that felt right. Truth is, I didn't want to remarry. Felt easier to stay alone than risk that kind of pain again. And now," he turned to look at her, "now I'm not so sure. Being alone felt safe, but it's also empty. Having you here, it's made me realize how much I've been missing. Simple things like conversation over dinner, someone to share the sunset with. I'd forgotten how good that feels." Grace's expression was unreadable in the darkness. "I'm still married to Curtis. Even if I wanted to move forward with my life, I can't, not legally. There are ways around that, divorce, annulment. It's not common, but it can be done. Curtis would never agree to a divorce. It would damage his reputation, make him look bad. He'd rather keep me trapped in the marriage forever than let me go. Then we find another way. Maybe you don't go back to being Grace Mitchell. Maybe you become someone new, start fresh somewhere Curtis will never think to look." She shook her head. "That's no kind of life, always hiding, always looking over my shoulder. And besides, I'm tired of running. Tired of being afraid. I just want to be free. Then we'll make you free." Ethan reached over and took her hand, half expecting her to pull away, but she didn't. Her fingers curled around his, holding tight. "I don't know how yet, but we'll figure it out together." "Why?" Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Ethan thought about lying, about giving her some noble answer about duty or honor. But she'd been lied to enough in her life. She deserved the truth. "Because somewhere along the way you became important to me. Because I look forward to seeing you at breakfast and I listen for your footsteps in the house. Because you make me laugh and you make me think and you make me want to be better than I am. Because I'm falling in love with you, Grace. And I know the timing is terrible and the situation is impossible, but that's the truth of it." She sucked in a breath, her hand tightening around his. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything. I know you're not ready. I know you might never be ready, and that's okay. I just needed you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, whatever we have to face, I'm here." For a long moment, Grace was silent. Then she said, "I'm terrified. Of Curtis, of my feelings, of everything. I don't trust myself anymore. How do I know this is real and not just me clinging to the first person who's shown me kindness? How do I know I'm not making another terrible mistake? You don't. None of us do. Love is always a risk, always a leap into the unknown. But I can tell you this. I will never hurt you. I will never try to control you or make you into something you're not. Whatever you choose to do, whoever you choose to be, I'll support it." even if that means supporting you when you decide to leave here and start over somewhere else." Tears were streaming down Grace's face now. "No one's ever said anything like that to me before. Curtis always said love meant sacrifice, that if I loved him, I'd do what he wanted." "But that's not love, is it?" "No. Love is wanting the other person's happiness even more than your own. It's giving them space to grow and change and become whoever they're meant to be. It's not about control or possession. It's about partnership and respect." Grace stood up suddenly, and Ethan thought he'd said too much, pushed too hard. But instead of going inside, she knelt in front of his chair, her hands gripping his knees, her eyes searching his face. "I'm scared," she whispered, "but I think I'm falling in love with you too. And that terrifies me more than anything Curtis could do." Ethan cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Then we'll be scared together, and we'll figure it out one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people trying to heal and maybe finding something beautiful in the process." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "Can you just hold me? I know it's forward, but I just need, come here." He pulled her up and into his lap, wrapping his arms around her carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she melted into him, her head on his shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring quiet reassurances. They stayed that way for a long time, wrapped in each other under the stars. And when Grace finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer, like she'd released something she'd been holding onto for too long. "Thank you," she said. "Always." He smiled at her. "Now, let's get you inside before you catch cold. Mrs. Chen will have both our hides if you get sick." Grace laughed, a small sound but genuine, and Ethan realized it was the first time he'd heard her laugh. It was worth every risk, every complication, just to hear that sound. But their peace was short-lived. 3 days later, Jack Weber rode out to the ranch at dawn, his horse lathered from a hard ride. Ethan met him outside, his stomach sinking at the look on Jack's face. "Curtis Mitchell bought the old Hanson place," Jack said without preamble. "5 miles east of your property line. Paid cash, moved in yesterday. He's staying, Ethan, setting up permanent," Ethan cursed. "He knows she's here, or suspects it strongly enough to camp on my doorstep. That's my thinking." Sheriff Henderson tried to convince him to move on, but Mitchell just smiled and said he'd fallen in love with the area, was thinking of investing in cattle. Whole town knows it's a lie, but there's nothing illegal about buying property. What's his angle, my guess? He's waiting for her to slip up, show herself in town. Or he's hoping to provoke you into doing something stupid. Men like him, they're good at playing the long game. After Jack left, Ethan found Grace in the garden. She was on her knees in the dirt, but she wasn't working. Just sitting there, staring at nothing. "You heard," he said. "Mrs. Chen told me. Jack spoke to her in the kitchen." Grace stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt with mechanical movements. "He's never going to leave, is he? Not until he has me back or I'm dead." "Those are the only 2 ways this ends." "That's not true. We'll find another way." "What way, Ethan? Be realistic. He has money, time, and the law on his side. I'm his legal wife. If he claims I'm mentally unfit, if he gets a judge to agree, they'll force me to go back with him. And this time he'll make sure I never get another chance to run. Then we don't let it get that far." "How? You can't fight the law. You can't fight his money and influence, and I won't let you destroy your life trying to protect me." She stepped closer, her eyes fierce. "I've been thinking about this all morning. There's only one solution. I leave. Disappear completely, change my name, go somewhere he'll never find me. California, maybe, or Oregon. Start over where no one knows Grace Mitchell ever existed." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "I'm not letting you run again. You said yourself you're tired of running. You deserve to stand your ground to have the life you want. But I can't have that life, not while I'm tied to him. She was crying now, angry tears. Don't you understand? Every day I stay here, I put you in more danger. Curtis is patient, but he's also vengeful. If he thinks you've taken something that belongs to him, he'll destroy you. Your ranch, your reputation, maybe your life. I can't live with that. And I can't live with you disappearing into the wind, always looking over your shoulder, never safe. There has to be another answer. Then tell me what it is, Grace's voice rose, because I've been racking my brain and I can't see a way out of this that doesn't end with someone getting hurt. Before Ethan could respond, they heard hoofbeats. A single rider coming up the drive at a leisurely pace. They both turned, and Ethan's blood ran cold when he recognized the well-dressed figure on the expensive horse. Curtis Mitchell had come calling. "Get inside," Ethan said quietly. "Lock yourself in your room and don't come out no matter what you hear. Ethan, go. Now." Grace ran for the house. Ethan watched her disappear inside before turning to face Curtis, who was dismounting with an easy smile. Up close in the harsh daylight, Curtis looked even more polished, like something out of a big city parlor rather than a Nevada ranch. His suit was immaculate, his boots expensive, his horse a beautiful chestnut gelding that probably cost more than Ethan made in a year. "Mr. Rourke," Curtis said pleasantly, "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to introduce myself properly. I'm your new neighbor, Curtis Mitchell. I know who you are, and you're not welcome here. Turn around and ride off my land." Curtis's smile never wavered. "Now, that's not very neighborly. I just wanted to get to know the area, meet the locals. This is a fine ranch you have. Must take a lot of work to run it alone. I manage. Now leave. I also wanted to ask if you'd reconsidered whether you've seen my wife. You see, I've been thinking about our last conversation. It occurred to me that perhaps you simply didn't recognize her from my description. Grace has a way of changing her appearance when she's in one of her episodes. Maybe wearing her hair differently, dressing down to avoid notice. I told you before I haven't seen her, and I won't tell you again. Get off my property." Curtis took a step closer, his eyes hardening despite the smile still plastered on his face. "Here's the thing, Mr. Rourke. I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits. My wife is mentally unwell, and she needs medical care that only I can provide. Anyone who keeps her from that care, who hides her or aids her in avoiding her husband's protection, well, that would be a serious crime. Kidnapping, possibly. Or harboring a mentally unfit person against her guardian's wishes. If your wife is here, which she's not, it would be her choice. Last I checked, women in this country have rights, even married ones." "Rights?" Curtis laughed, a cold sound. "Tell me, have you ever been married, Mr. Rourke? Then you understand that a husband has certain legal obligations and privileges regarding his wife's welfare. Grace is sick. She doesn't know what's best for her. I do, and I will find her whether you help me or not. Is that a threat? It's a promise, and a friendly warning. I'm a wealthy man, Mr. Rourke. I can make things very difficult for people who cross me. I have lawyers, influential friends, judges who owe me favors. I can tie you up in legal battles for years. I can ruin your reputation, make sure no one in this county does business with you. Or we can avoid all that unpleasantness. Just tell me where Grace is and I'll be on my way. You'll never hear from me again." Ethan stepped closer until they were nearly nose to nose. "Here's my promise, Mitchell. If you ever set foot on my property again without an invitation, I'll shoot you for trespassing. This is Nevada, not Utah. Out here, a man's land is his castle and he has every right to defend it. Sheriff Henderson will back me on that, so will every rancher in 50 miles. We take care of our own and we don't take kindly to outsiders making threats. For a moment, Curtis's mask slipped and Ethan saw the rage beneath. The man's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. But then the smile was back, colder than before. "You're making a mistake," Curtis said softly. "One you'll regret. The only mistake here is you thinking you could intimidate me. Now get on your horse and leave before I drag you off." Curtis mounted his horse with deliberate slowness, making it clear he was leaving by choice, not because he was afraid. "This isn't over, Rourke. I'll find Grace. And when I do, I'll make sure she understands what happens to wives who betray their husbands, what happens to everyone who helped her." He rode off at a trot, and Ethan watched until he disappeared down the long drive. Only then did he allow his hands to shake, adrenaline coursing through him. That could have gone so much worse. Curtis had been testing him, seeing how far he could push. And now Ethan had declared war. He found Grace huddled in her room, sitting on the floor with her back against the door. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "He's gone," Ethan said gently. "He's gone and you're safe. Did he say anything? Did he threaten you?" "Nothing I can't handle. But Grace, we need to talk seriously about what happens next. Curtis knows you're here. He can't prove it yet, but he knows, and he's not going to stop." Grace pulled her knees to her chest. "I should leave, tonight, before this gets worse. No, running isn't the answer anymore. We need to end this permanently." Ethan sat down beside her on the floor. "I've been thinking. There might be a way to get you free of him legally." "How?" "Divorce is almost impossible, especially against a husband's wishes." "Not divorce. Annulment or abandonment. If we can prove Curtis is dangerous, if we can get enough testimony about his character, a judge might grant you freedom. It's a long shot, but it's possible. It would take months, maybe years, and Curtis would fight it every step of the way. Then we fight back. We find other women he's hurt. We build a case. We make it impossible for any judge to send you back to him." Grace looked at him with eyes full of pain and exhaustion. "Why are you doing this, really? This isn't just about being a good person or doing the right thing anymore. Curtis threatened you today. This could cost you everything." Ethan took her hand. "Because I love you. Because I want a future with you, and that's not possible while you're looking over your shoulder. Because you deserve justice, not just escape. And because some things are worth fighting for." "I love you too," Grace whispered. "That's what makes this so hard. If I didn't care about you, I could leave and not look back. But the thought of Curtis hurting you because of me, it's unbearable. Then trust me, trust us. Let's fight this together." Before Grace could answer, they heard a commotion downstairs. Voices raised, Mrs. Chen shouting in rapid Cantonese. Ethan jumped to his feet, helping Grace up. They rushed downstairs to find Mrs. Chen facing off with 3 men in the parlor. One was Curtis, and the other 2 were rough-looking characters Ethan didn't recognize. "I told them to leave," Mrs. Chen said angrily. "They pushed past me." Curtis smiled. "Mr. Rourke, I tried being reasonable, but you've left me no choice. These gentlemen are bounty hunters. I've hired them to locate my wife, and we have legal authority to search any property where she might be hiding. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." "You have no authority here," Ethan growled. "Get out before I throw you out." One of the bounty hunters, a hulking man with a scarred face, stepped forward. "We got papers, signed by a judge in Salt Lake City. Legal warrant to retrieve Grace Mitchell and return her to her lawful husband. You interfere, you're breaking the law. Let me see those papers." Curtis produced a folded document from his jacket. Ethan scanned it quickly, his heart sinking. It looked official, complete with a judge's signature and seal. The warrant described Grace as mentally unfit and authorized her return to her husband's care by any legal means necessary. "This is from Utah," Ethan said. "It has no power in Nevada. Federal law says otherwise." A legal warrant from one state must be honored in all states. Now, where is my wife? Grace stepped forward before Ethan could stop her. I'm here. Curtis's face lit up with triumph. Grace, darling, thank God, I've been so worried. Come, let's get you home where you belong. I'm not going anywhere with you. The triumph faded, replaced by cold anger. You don't have a choice. These men have legal authority to take you by force if necessary. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. This is kidnapping, Ethan said, moving to stand beside Grace. I don't care what your fake papers say. She's staying here. The scarred bounty hunter pulled back his coat, revealing a gun at his hip. Step aside, mister. We don't want trouble, but we'll do what we need to do. The second bounty hunter, younger but equally rough, drew his own weapon. Lady comes with us, that's all there is to it. Ethan's mind raced. He was unarmed, and these men clearly had no qualms about violence. If he fought them, someone would get hurt, probably Grace. But if he let them take her, he might never see her again. The standoff was broken by the sound of multiple horses outside. Sheriff Cal Henderson burst through the door, followed by Jack Weber and two other ranchers Ethan recognized. They all carried rifles, and their faces were grim. Heard you had unwelcome visitors, Ethan, Cal said, positioning himself between the bounty hunters and Grace. Thought you might need a hand. Curtis's composure slipped. Sheriff, these men are legally authorized. These men are trespassing on private property with weapons drawn. That's a crime in Nevada. I'd suggest they holster those guns before someone gets hurt. We have a warrant. I've seen your warrant. It's not worth the paper it's printed on. You got a judge in Utah to sign off on some lies, but that doesn't give you the right to invade a Nevada ranch with armed thugs. Now, you've got two choices. You can leave peacefully, or I can arrest all three of you for trespassing, brandishing weapons, and attempted kidnapping. The scarred bounty hunter looked at Curtis. You said this would be simple. It will be. The sheriff is bluffing. Cal levered a round into his rifle. Try me. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Curtis gestured to the bounty hunters. Stand down. We'll settle this legally through proper channels. The bounty hunters holstered their weapons reluctantly. Curtis straightened his jacket, his face a mask of cold fury. This isn't over, Sheriff. I have rights and the law will back me up. Maybe. But while we're sorting that out, you stay off this property. And if I hear about you trying to grab Mrs. Mitchell in town or anywhere else, I'll lock you up so fast your head will spin. Understand? Curtis smiled, but his eyes were deadly. Perfectly. But know this, Mr. Rourke. Grace is my wife. She will come home with me one way or another. It's only a matter of time. He swept out, the bounty hunters following. Cal waited until they heard horses leaving before lowering his rifle. That was too close, he said. Ethan, Jack came and got me soon as he saw Mitchell riding out here with those men. You need to be more careful. I know, thank you, Cal, all of you. Ethan looked at the men who'd come to help. I owe you. Don't mention it, said one of the ranchers, Tom Morrison. Mitchell's been making himself unwelcome all over the county. Most of us have wives or daughters. We don't take kindly to men who hurt women. After they left, Grace collapsed onto the sofa, shaking. This is madness. He brought bounty hunters, armed men. What happens next time? What if people get hurt because of me? Mrs. Chen brought tea with shaking hands. Bad man. Very bad man. We need to escalate our plans, Ethan said. Cal, can we get Grace legal representation? Someone who can fight this in court. There's a lawyer in Ely, Marcus Brennan. He's good and he's not afraid of difficult cases. I'll send him a telegram today. Thank you. In the meantime, we need to make sure Grace is never alone, never vulnerable. Curtis is getting desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. Grace set down her teacup with trembling hands. "I can't live like this, Ethan. Constantly afraid, constantly guarded. This isn't life, it's prison. It's temporary, just until we can get you legally free. And if we can't, if no judge will grant me freedom, what then?" Ethan didn't have an answer. The truth was, the law favored husbands in almost every circumstance. Getting Grace legally separated from Curtis would be an uphill battle, and there were no guarantees. Over the next 2 weeks, events moved quickly. Marcus Brennan, the lawyer from Ely, arrived to meet with Grace. He was a thin, serious man in his 40s, with sharp eyes and a methodical way of thinking. He interviewed Grace extensively about her marriage, documenting every incident of abuse, every attempt to control her life. "It's not a strong case," he admitted after several hours. "The law is heavily weighted toward preserving marriages. But you've got some things in your favor. Curtis's use of bounty hunters makes him look bad. His willingness to use violence shows poor character. And if we can find other victims, other women he's hurt or controlled, we can establish a pattern." "How do we find them?" Grace asked. "I'll hire investigators. They'll dig into Curtis's past, talk to people in Salt Lake City, see what they can uncover. These men usually leave a trail. We just need to find it." Meanwhile, Curtis launched his own offensive. He started spreading rumors in McGill that Grace was mentally unstable, dangerous even. He positioned himself as the concerned husband trying to help his sick wife. Some people believed him, but most didn't, especially after Sheriff Henderson made it clear whose side he was on. Curtis also filed legal motions in both Utah and Nevada courts, trying to force Grace's return. Marcus fought them at every turn, buying them time but unable to achieve a permanent solution. Through it all, Ethan and Grace grew closer. The danger surrounding them seemed to intensify their feelings, stripping away pretense and leaving only truth. They spent long evenings talking, sharing their fears and hopes. Ethan told her about Sarah, about the guilt he'd carried for not being there when she died. Grace told him about her childhood, about the mother she'd lost and the father who'd never really seen her. One night, sitting on the porch under the stars, Grace finally smiled. It was small and tentative, but it was real, reaching her eyes for the first time since Ethan had met her. "What?" he asked, seeing her expression. "I just realized something. I'm happy. Right here, right now, despite everything, I'm happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel that again." Ethan took her hand. "You deserve happiness, Grace. You deserve everything good this world has to offer. So do you. You've spent 3 years in mourning, punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Sarah's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't because you failed her. Sometimes, terrible things just happen. I know that now. Being with you has helped me see it. You've given me a reason to look forward instead of back." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "What happens if Marcus can't free me from Curtis, if the law won't let me go? Then we find another way, together." "You mean leave, disappear, if we have to?" "I love this ranch, but I love you more. If it comes down to choosing between this place and a life with you, there's no contest. I can't ask you to give up everything you've built. You're not asking, I'm offering. Because you're my future, Grace. The ranch is just land and buildings. Home is wherever you are." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you, Ethan Rourke. I didn't think I could love anyone after Curtis, but you've shown me what love really is. Not control or possession, but freedom and partnership. I love you too. And whatever comes next, we face it together." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, a promise and a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Grace was smiling again, that beautiful smile he'd worked so hard to coax out of her, but their moment of peace was short-lived. The next day, Marcus arrived with news. "My investigators found something. Curtis was married before, about 6 years ago. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances. Everyone in the parlor went still. Ethan, Grace, Cal Henderson, and Mrs. Chen had all gathered to hear Marcus's update. "What kind of circumstances?" Cal asked. "She fell down the stairs in their home, broke her neck. Curtis claimed it was an accident, that she'd been drinking and lost her balance. The local police investigated but found no evidence of foul play. However, my investigators talked to the neighbors. Several mentioned hearing arguments, seeing bruises on the wife. One woman said she'd tried to help, offered the wife a place to stay, but the wife disappeared shortly after. A week later, she was dead. Grace's face had gone white. He killed her. He killed his first wife and got away with it." "We can't prove that," Marcus cautioned. "But it establishes a pattern of behavior. It shows Curtis has a history of violence toward women. That could be crucial in getting you freed from the marriage. Or it could get Grace killed," Ethan said grimly. "If Curtis thinks we're getting close to exposing him, if he thinks he's going to lose control of her permanently, he might decide that a dead wife is better than a disobedient one. Which is why we need to move fast," Marcus said. "I've filed for an emergency hearing in front of Judge Walsh in Ely. He's fair-minded, and he doesn't like wife beaters. If we can present our evidence well, he might grant a legal separation at minimum, possibly even an annulment based on fraud, if we can prove Curtis misrepresented himself during courtship." "When's the hearing?" Grace asked. "Next week. You'll need to testify, Grace. Talk about what Curtis did to you. I know it won't be easy, but it's necessary." Grace straightened her shoulders, and Ethan saw steel in her spine. "I'll do it. Whatever it takes to be free of him." The week leading up to the hearing was tense. Curtis made no further moves, which somehow felt more threatening than his earlier aggression. He was planning something. Ethan was sure of it. The man wouldn't give up this easily. The day before they were to leave for Ely, Ethan was in the barn when he heard Grace scream. He ran toward the sound, his heart pounding, and found her near the house, staring at something on the ground. It was a dead rabbit, its throat cut, left on the back porch where only Grace would find it. A note was pinned to it with a knife. "Think carefully about your choices." Ethan pulled Grace into his arms, feeling her shake. "He's trying to scare you. Don't let him win." "It's working," she whispered. "Ethan, what if I testify and the judge doesn't believe me? What if Curtis wins? He'll kill me. I know he will. He'd rather see me dead than free." "That's not going to happen. We have evidence now, witnesses. The truth is on our side." "The truth doesn't always win. Look what happened to his first wife. She's dead and he's walking free. Because she was alone. You're not." "You have me, Marcus, Cal. Everyone in McGill who knows what Curtis really is. He can't make you disappear without answering for it." Grace pulled back, looking up at him. "Promise me something. If this goes wrong, if Curtis somehow wins and they try to force me to go back with him, promise me you won't let him take me alive. I'd rather die free than live as his prisoner again." "Grace, don't talk like that. Promise me, Ethan. Please. I need to know there's a way out." He cupped her face in his hands. "I promise you won't have to go back to him, but you're not going to die. We're going to win this fight, and then we're going to build a life together. That's what's going to happen. Understand?" She nodded, but the fear didn't leave her eyes. That night, Ethan sat up with a loaded rifle across his lap, keeping watch. He wouldn't put it past Curtis to try something before the hearing, to grab Grace or worse. But the night passed quietly, and the next morning they set out for Ely in a wagon, accompanied by Sheriff Henderson and Marcus Brennan. The journey took most of the day, traveling through high desert country, past abandoned mines and small ranching operations. They arrived in the early evening and checked into a hotel, taking rooms on the same floor for safety. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. Ethan barely slept, listening for any sound that might indicate trouble. When dawn finally came, he felt exhausted and wired, too much coffee and too little rest. Grace looked pale but determined when they gathered for breakfast. She wore her best dress, dark blue with a high collar, her hair pulled back in a simple style. She looked respectable and serious, nothing like the hysterical woman Curtis painted her to be. "Remember," Marcus coached her over coffee, "answer truthfully but don't elaborate unless asked. Stay calm, even if Curtis or his lawyers try to provoke you. The judge needs to see you as rational and clear-headed." "I understand." The courthouse was a substantial brick building in the center of Ely, reflecting the town's prosperity from nearby copper mines. Inside, the courtroom was wood-paneled and official, with a raised bench for the judge and rows of seats for observers. Curtis was already there with two lawyers, both expensively dressed men from Salt Lake City. He looked confident, even smug, nodding at Ethan and Grace as they entered as if this were a friendly social occasion. Judge Walsh turned out to be a grizzled man in his 60s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened as Marcus presented their petition for legal separation and possible annulment, then turned to Curtis's lawyers for their response. The lead lawyer, a slick character named Harrison Pierce, stood smoothly. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of a mentally troubled woman being manipulated by a man who wishes to steal another man's wife. Mr. Mitchell is a respected businessman with no history of violence or wrongdoing. Mrs. Mitchell suffers from hysteria and delusions. She requires medical care, which my client wishes to provide in the loving environment of their home. This petition is an abuse of the court's time." "That's quite a statement, Mr. Pierce," Judge Walsh said dryly. "I assume you have evidence to back it up." "We do, Your Honor. We have letters from Mrs. Mitchell's doctor in Salt Lake City attesting to her mental fragility. We have testimony from friends and family members about her unstable moods, and we can demonstrate that Mr. Mitchell has been nothing but a devoted husband throughout their marriage." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, if I may, we have rather different evidence to present, including testimony from Mrs. Mitchell herself, medical documentation of injuries sustained during her marriage, and evidence that Mr. Mitchell has a history of violence toward women." Judge Walsh leaned back in his chair. "This sounds like it's going to take more than one morning. We'll hear testimony from both sides. Mr. Brennan, call your first witness." Grace took the stand, her hand shaking as she placed it on the Bible to swear her oath. Ethan watched her, willing her strength, pride swelling in his chest at her courage. Marcus began gently, establishing basic facts about Grace's marriage, how she'd met Curtis, how the courtship had progressed. Then he moved to the darker material. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you describe what your marriage was like after the wedding?" Grace took a breath. "At first it seemed normal, but within a few weeks Curtis began making rules. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't see friends without his permission. He chose my clothes, my meals, even the books I was allowed to read. When I questioned these rules, he would get angry. 'Can you describe his anger?' He would yell, call me names. Tell me I was stupid, ungrateful, that no one else would tolerate someone like me. Then he started hitting me." A murmur went through the courtroom. Curtis's face remained impassive, but Ethan saw his hands clench. "Can you describe the first incident of physical violence?" "It was about 2 months after the wedding. I talked to a neighbor without asking permission first. Curtis came home and found us talking. After the neighbor left, he grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and shook me. He said I'd embarrassed him, that I needed to learn to behave properly. Then he slapped me across the face. Did this happen again? Many times. If I did anything he perceived as wrong, he would hit me. Sometimes with his fist, usually where it wouldn't show. My ribs, my stomach, my back. He was always careful not to mark my face where others could see, except once when I tried to leave. Can you tell the court about that? Grace's voice shook but didn't break. It was about a year into our marriage. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag while he was at work and went to my friend Martha's house. Curtis found me the same day. He apologized, brought flowers, convinced Martha and her husband that I was confused, not thinking clearly. They believed him. He was so charming, so concerned. But on the way home in the carriage, he hit me so hard he broke my nose. She pulled out a small photograph from her bag, one Ethan hadn't seen before. "This is me, 3 days later." Martha took the photograph before Curtis forbade her from seeing me again. The photograph was passed to Judge Walsh, who studied it with a grim expression. It showed Grace with 2 black eyes and a badly swollen nose, her face a mask of bruises. After that, I didn't try to leave again, not for almost a year. I was too afraid. But then Curtis went to San Francisco on business, and I realized it was my only chance. I took what money I'd hidden and ran. I've been running ever since. Harrison Pierce stood for cross-examination, his expression skeptical. "Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that you've been diagnosed with hysteria by multiple doctors?" "No. One doctor, Curtis's personal physician, wrote that in my file. But only after Curtis told him I was hysterical. The doctor never examined me independently." "Isn't it true that you have episodes of confusion, memory loss, irrational fears?" "No. Curtis told people that to explain my absences when I was too bruised to be seen in public. He kept me locked in the house until the marks faded." "That's a serious accusation. You have any proof?" "The photograph you just saw. The testimony of my former employer, Mrs. Pemberton, who noticed the bruises, and the testimony of Curtis's former neighbors regarding his first wife." Pierce's face tightened. "Your Honor, the death of Mr. Mitchell's first wife was ruled an accident. It's irrelevant to these proceedings and prejudicial." "I'll decide what's relevant, Mr. Pierce," Judge Walsh said. "Continue, Mr. Brennan." Marcus called several more witnesses. Doc Patterson testified about Grace's condition when she arrived in McGill, the fear and trauma evident in her demeanor. Mrs. Pemberton, the dress shop owner, had traveled from Salt Lake City to testify about Grace's employment and the bruises she'd seen. 2 of Curtis's former neighbors in Salt Lake City testified via written depositions about the arguments they'd heard. The ambulance called to the house when Curtis's first wife died. By the end of the day, a damning picture had emerged. Curtis's lawyers tried to spin it, to suggest Grace was exaggerating or misremembering, but Judge Walsh looked increasingly skeptical of their arguments. The hearing resumed the next morning with Curtis himself on the stand. He was smooth and confident, presenting himself as the wronged husband trying to help his troubled wife. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus began his cross-examination, "you've described yourself as a devoted husband. Yet multiple witnesses have testified to seeing bruises on your wife, hearing arguments." "How do you explain that?" "Grace is clumsy. She bruises easily. As for arguments, what marriage doesn't have disagreements? But I never raised a hand to my wife. These accusations are hurtful and false." "What about your first wife, Mr. Mitchell?" "She died under suspicious circumstances, did she not?" Curtis's composure cracked slightly. "My first wife's death was a tragedy, an accident. The police investigated and found no wrongdoing. But neighbors reported hearing arguments, seeing bruises, just as they have with Mrs. Mitchell." "Isn't that an interesting pattern? Coincidence? Nothing more." Marcus let that hang in the air for a moment. "Mr. Mitchell, you hired bounty hunters to retrieve your wife. Armed men. You invaded a private ranch with the intention of taking her by force." Does that sound like the behavior of a concerned husband? I was desperate. My wife needs help, and she was being kept from me by a man with ulterior motives. You mean Mr. Rourke? What ulterior motives would those be? It's obvious. He wants her for himself. He's turned her against me, filled her head with lies. Or perhaps he's provided her with safety she desperately needed. Perhaps he believed her when she described the abuse she'd suffered. Is that such a difficult thing to accept? Curtis's face flushed with anger. I have never abused my wife. She is sick, and she needs treatment. This entire proceeding is a travesty. Grace is my wife, my property under the law, and I demand she be returned to me immediately. A shocked silence filled the courtroom. Even Curtis's own lawyers looked dismayed at his choice of words. Judge Walsh leaned forward, his expression stern. Your property, Mr. Mitchell. Is that how you view your wife? Curtis seemed to realize his mistake. I misspoke. I meant that under the law, a man has certain rights and responsibilities regarding his wife's welfare. I know what the law says, Mr. Mitchell. I also know that times are changing. Women are not property, sir, no matter what some outdated statutes might suggest. Judge Walsh shuffled through his papers. I've heard enough. I'll issue my ruling in 1 hour. Court is adjourned. The wait was excruciating. They gathered in a small room adjacent to the courthouse, Grace pacing nervously while Ethan tried to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Marcus reviewed his notes, occasionally muttering to himself. It went well, Marcus said finally. Curtis calling Grace his property was a gift. No judge wants to side with a man who expresses such regressive views. But can Walsh actually grant an annulment? Grace asked. We're married. That's a legal fact. He can grant a legal separation at minimum, which would free you from Curtis's control even if the marriage technically exists on paper. An annulment is harder, but not impossible. We argued fraud, that Curtis misrepresented his character and intentions during courtship. If Walsh buys that argument, the marriage could be declared invalid from the start. When they were called back into the courtroom, Judge Walsh had a stack of documents in front of him. He looked grave, and Ethan's stomach clenched with anxiety. I've considered the testimony and evidence presented over the past 2 days, Walsh began. This is a difficult case, touching on sensitive issues of marital rights, personal liberty, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. However, certain facts are clear to me. He turned to Curtis. Mr. Mitchell, you have presented yourself as a concerned husband. However, your behavior throughout these proceedings has been troubling. Your use of bounty hunters, your invasion of a private ranch, your testimony today where you referred to your wife as your property. These are not the actions of a loving spouse. They are the actions of a controlling and potentially dangerous individual. Curtis's face was turning red, but he said nothing. Walsh turned to Grace. Mrs. Mitchell, your testimony was credible and corroborated by multiple witnesses. The photographic evidence of your injuries is disturbing. Additionally, the pattern of behavior exhibited by Mr. Mitchell toward both you and his first wife suggests a history of domestic violence. While I cannot prove that Mr. Mitchell caused his first wife's death, the similarities between the two situations are notable. Hope began to bloom in Ethan's chest. Therefore, Walsh continued, I am granting a decree of legal separation, effective immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, you are no longer under any legal obligation to live with or obey your husband. You are free to establish your own residence and make your own decisions. Mr. Mitchell, you are hereby ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Mrs. Mitchell at all times. You are not to contact her, approach her, or make any attempt to control her actions. Violation of this order will result in arrest and prosecution. Your Honor, Harrison Pierce stood quickly. We intend to appeal. You can appeal all you want, Mr. Pierce. But until a higher court overturns my decision, this order stands. Furthermore, I am granting Mrs. Mitchell's petition for annulment on the grounds of fraud. The evidence suggests that Mr. Mitchell deliberately misrepresented his character and intentions during courtship, concealing his violent tendencies until after the marriage was finalized. This constitutes fraud under Nevada law. Therefore, I declare the marriage between Curtis Mitchell and Grace Mitchell to be null and void, as if it never existed. The courtroom erupted in noise. Curtis was on his feet, shouting objections. His lawyers were trying to calm him down while simultaneously arguing with the judge. But through it all, Ethan heard Grace's sob of relief. He turned to find her crying, her hands covering her face, her whole body shaking. "It's over," she gasped. "It's really over." Ethan pulled her into his arms, not caring that they were in a courtroom, not caring who saw. "You're free, Grace. You did it. You're free." Judge Walsh banged his gavel, restoring order. "Mr. Mitchell, I suggest you accept this ruling gracefully and move on with your life. Any further harassment of Miss Mitchell, as she is now legally entitled to be called, will result in serious consequences." "Do I make myself clear?" Curtis didn't answer. His face was twisted with rage, his eyes fixed on Grace with such hatred that Ethan instinctively stepped between them. "Do I make myself clear, Mr. Mitchell?" Walsh repeated, his voice like iron. "Perfectly, Your Honor," Curtis finally said, his voice dripping with venom. They left the courthouse surrounded by Sheriff Henderson and several deputies Cal had arranged to be present. Curtis stood on the courthouse steps, watching them go, and the look on his face made Ethan's blood run cold. This wasn't over. Despite the judge's ruling, despite the legal protections now in place, Curtis Mitchell wasn't going to accept defeat. "We need to be careful," Ethan said quietly to Cal as they walked back to the hotel. "That man's dangerous. I know. I've already arranged for deputies to keep an eye on him while he's in Ely. And I'll make sure word gets back to McGill that if he shows his face there, he'll be arrested on sight." That night, they celebrated Grace's freedom with a quiet dinner at the hotel. Grace seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally been lifted. She smiled freely now, laughed at Ethan's stories, made plans for the future. "What happens now?" she asked, holding Ethan's hand across the table. "I'm free, but I have nothing. No money, no possessions except what I carried when I ran." "You have me," Ethan said. "You have a home at the ranch for as long as you want it, and as for money, we'll figure that out. Maybe you could start a dressmaking business in McGill. Mrs. Pemberton said you were the best seamstress she'd ever had." "I'd like that. Having work that's mine, something I'm good at. Maybe I could teach other women too, give them a skill they could use to support themselves if needed." "That's a wonderful idea." Marcus joined them for coffee after dinner, reviewing the legal documents that made Grace's freedom official. "These papers are solid," he said. "Curtis can appeal, but it will take months or years to work through the courts, and I don't think any judge will overturn Walsh's ruling." The evidence was too strong. "What if Curtis ignores the order?" Grace asked. "What if he comes after me anyway? Then he'll be arrested and prosecuted. He's not stupid, Grace. He knows that if he violates this order, he could end up in prison. Men like Curtis care about their reputations, their standing in society. He won't risk that." But Ethan wasn't so sure. Curtis had been publicly humiliated, his carefully constructed image destroyed. Men like that didn't take such defeats lightly. They either slunk away to lick their wounds or they lashed out in fury. And Ethan suspected Curtis was the lashing out type. They left Ely the next morning, taking a different route back to McGill on Cal's advice. The sheriff was worried about ambush, about Curtis trying something desperate before accepting defeat. The journey took longer, winding through mountain passes and isolated valleys, but they made it back to the ranch without incident. Life slowly returned to normal over the following weeks. Grace settled into her new status as a free woman, no longer hiding or looking over her shoulder constantly. She started taking orders for dressmaking, and word spread quickly through the county about her skill. Soon, she had more work than she could handle, sewing dresses for ranchers' wives and daughters, doing alterations and repairs. Ethan watched her bloom like a desert flower after rain. The frightened, closed-off woman who'd arrived at his ranch months ago was gone, replaced by someone confident and warm. She smiled easily now, laughed often. The shadows in her eyes faded day by day. One evening, about 2 months after the hearing, Ethan found her on the porch swing, watching the sunset. He sat beside her, and she immediately leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "About what? About us. About what happens next." Ethan's heart sped up. "What do you want to happen next?" "I want to stay here, with you, not as a guest or someone you're protecting, but as your partner, your equal." She pulled back to look at him. "Ethan, I want to marry you if you'll have me." He stared at her, surprise and joy flooding through him. "You want to marry me? Are you sure? After everything with Curtis, I thought Curtis taught me what marriage shouldn't be. You've shown me what it could be. Partnership, respect, love that lifts up instead of tearing down." "I want that, Ethan. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to face whatever comes next together. Grace, yes. God, yes, I'll have you. I want nothing more than to marry you." He kissed her, deep and passionate, pouring years of loneliness and months of longing into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "When?" he asked. "Soon. I don't want a big wedding or anything fancy. Just us, a preacher, and the people we care about. Maybe here at the ranch under the stars." "That sounds perfect." They were married 3 weeks later on a warm October evening. The ceremony took place in the ranch yard, with lanterns strung between the house and barn, creating a warm glow in the gathering darkness. Grace wore a dress she'd made herself, simple but beautiful, cream-colored with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan wore his best suit, the one he'd been married in before, but it didn't feel like a betrayal of Sarah's memory. He knew somehow that she would approve. The guests were small in number but important. Doc Patterson, who'd first brought Grace to the ranch, Sheriff Cal Henderson and his wife, Mrs. Chen, crying happy tears, Jack Weber and Tom Morrison, the ranchers who'd stood with Ethan against Curtis, Mrs. Pemberton, who'd made the journey from Salt Lake City to see her former employee happy, and Marcus Brennan, the lawyer who'd made it all possible. The preacher from McGill's small church performed the ceremony, his words simple and heartfelt. When Ethan slipped the ring on Grace's finger, a simple gold band he'd commissioned from a jeweler in Ely, his hand was steady. This was right. This was what both of them needed. "I, Ethan Rourke, take you, Grace, to be my wife," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet desert evening. "I promise to honor you, protect you, and love you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to lift you up and never tear you down. I promise to give you freedom to be whoever you want to be, and to stand beside you in whatever you choose to do. You are my heart, my home, my future, and I will love you until my last breath." Grace's vows were equally heartfelt. "I, Grace, take you, Ethan, to be my husband. You showed me what love really is when I thought I'd never know it. You gave me safety when I had nowhere to turn. You saw me, really saw me, when everyone else looked away. I promise to love you with all I have, to support your dreams, to be your partner and your equal. I promise to never take for granted the gift you've given me, freedom to be myself. You are my home, Ethan Rourke, and I will love you until the stars fall from the sky. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan kissed Grace, and it felt like sealing a promise, like stepping into a future that was bright and full of possibility. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with the food, preparing a feast of roasted beef, vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and an apple pie that was Ethan's favorite. They ate and drank under the stars, sharing stories and laughter. At one point, Doc Patterson pulled Ethan aside. "You did good, son. Sarah would be proud of you and happy that you found love again. Thank you, Doc, for everything. If you hadn't brought Grace here, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the right people find each other at the right time. You both needed each other. I'm just glad I could help make it happen." As the evening wore on, guests began to drift away, heading back to their homes and hotels. Mrs. Chen gave Grace a fierce hug before leaving with Doc Patterson, who would give her a ride back to town. Sheriff Henderson shook Ethan's hand, his grip firm. "Be happy," Cal said, "and keep an eye out. Curtis hasn't shown his face in months, but men like that don't always stay gone. I know, but tonight I'm not thinking about Curtis Mitchell. Tonight is about celebrating the woman I love and the life we're building." Finally, they were alone. Ethan took Grace's hand and led her into the house. The lamps were lit, casting a warm glow over the familiar rooms that now felt transformed, full of promise instead of memory. He'd prepared the bedroom himself, fresh sheets on the bed, flowers in a vase on the dresser. "Nervous?" he asked, seeing Grace hesitate at the doorway. "A little. It's been so long since I felt anything but fear about this. With Curtis, it was never about connection or pleasure. It was about control, about him taking what he wanted. I don't even know if I remember how to be intimate with someone I actually love." Ethan cupped her face gently. "Then we'll figure it out together. There's no rush, no expectations. We have the rest of our lives. Tonight can be whatever you want it to be. I want to be close to you. I want to feel connected, but I need you to be patient with me. Always." He kissed her softly. "We'll go slow, and if you need to stop at any point, just say so. This is about us, about sharing something beautiful, not about obligation or duty." They took their time, learning each other's bodies, building trust and intimacy. Grace cried at one point, overwhelmed by the gentleness, by the realization that this was what she'd been missing all along. Ethan held her, whispered reassurances, made sure she knew she was safe and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Grace's head on Ethan's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For showing me what love is supposed to feel like, for being patient, for seeing me. You never have to thank me for loving you, Grace. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and for the first time in years, neither of them had nightmares. The months that followed were the happiest of Ethan's life. He and Grace fell into an easy rhythm, partners in running the ranch and building their life together. Grace's dressmaking business thrived, and she started teaching sewing classes to women in McGill, just as she'd planned. Ethan expanded the ranch, buying additional cattle and hiring more permanent hands to help manage the growing operation. They talked about having children, about the family they both wanted. Grace was hesitant at first, afraid that she'd inherited her mother's weakness, that pregnancy might kill her as it had killed Sarah. But Doc Patterson assured her that every woman was different, and that with proper care, there was no reason to expect complications. In the spring of 1879, Grace discovered she was pregnant. Ethan was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. He remembered Sarah's pregnancy, the way it had ended in tragedy. But Grace was strong, healthy, and they had the best medical care available. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace bloomed, her body changing in ways that filled Ethan with wonder and love. They prepared a nursery in one of the upstairs bedrooms, painting the walls a sunny yellow and building a cradle from oak wood. It was in her 7th month of pregnancy that Curtis returned. Ethan was in the south pasture, checking on a pregnant cow when he heard the shot. It came from the direction of the house, a single crack that echoed across the desert. His blood turned to ice. Grace was at home, alone except for Mrs. Chen. He rode back at a full gallop, his heart pounding with fear. As he approached the house, he saw a horse he didn't recognize tied to the porch rail, a fancy black gelding. Curtis. Ethan dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. He burst through the front door to find a scene from his nightmares. Curtis stood in the parlor, a gun in his hand. Grace was backed against the wall, her arms wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly, her face white with terror. Mrs. Chen lay on the floor near the kitchen door, blood spreading from a wound in her shoulder. "You," Curtis snarled when he saw Ethan. "This is your fault. You took her from me. You ruined everything." "Let her go, Curtis. This is over. You've already shot an innocent woman. Don't make this worse." "Worse? How could it be worse? My reputation is destroyed. My business is falling apart because no one wants to work with a man who beats his wife. Everyone looks at me with disgust now, all because of her." He gestured with the gun at Grace. "She was supposed to be mine. Obedient, grateful. But she ran, and then you poisoned her against me." "I didn't poison her. I just gave her the safety and respect she deserved. You did this to yourself, Curtis. Your own actions brought you here. Liar, you turned her against me, and now look at her. Pregnant with your bastard. That should have been my child, my family. Mine. Your family died with your first wife," Ethan said, trying to keep Curtis focused on him instead of Grace. "The woman you probably murdered. Did you, Curtis? Did you kill her when she tried to leave you?" Curtis's face twisted with rage. "She was weak. She wouldn't listen, wouldn't learn. I gave her so many chances, but she kept defying me. The stairs were an accident, but maybe it was for the best. She would never have been the wife I needed. And Grace was supposed to replace her, be the perfect, obedient wife you could control." Yes, and she was at first, so beautiful, so eager to please. But then she started getting ideas, started thinking she had rights. I had to correct her, teach her proper behavior. But instead of learning, she ran. She humiliated me. She destroyed everything I built. So you're here for what? Revenge, justice. If I can't have her, no one can. And if I'm going to hang for one murder, I might as well make it 3. Curtis raised the gun, pointing it at Grace's belly. Everything happened in slow motion. Ethan raised his rifle, but he knew he wouldn't be fast enough. Curtis's finger tightened on the trigger. Grace screamed, her hands protectively covering her stomach. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. But it wasn't Curtis's gun that fired. It was Mrs. Chen's. The older woman had pulled herself across the floor, blood trailing behind her, and grabbed the shotgun Ethan kept near the door. She'd fired from a sitting position, the blast catching Curtis in the side and spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, his gun clattering away across the floor. Ethan was moving before Curtis hit the ground, kicking the gun away and checking him for other weapons. Curtis was still alive but badly wounded, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. "Grace," Ethan called out. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." "But Mrs. Chen," Ethan ran to Mrs. Chen, who'd collapsed back against the wall. Her shoulder was bleeding badly, but her eyes were alert. "Stubborn man," she muttered in Cantonese. Try to hurt my family. No one hurts my family. You saved us, Ethan said, pressing his hand against the wound to slow the bleeding. Grace, ride to town, get Doc Patterson and Sheriff Henderson. Hurry. Grace ran out, and Ethan heard her galloping away moments later. He stayed with Mrs. Chen, keeping pressure on the wound while keeping an eye on Curtis. The man was conscious but fading, his face gray with shock and blood loss. Why? Ethan asked him. Why couldn't you just let her go? You could have started over, found someone else. Curtis laughed, a wet, painful sound. Because she was mine, and no one takes what's mine. I'd rather die than let her be happy with you. Then you're getting your wish. Curtis's eyes closed, and for a moment, Ethan thought he was dead. But then they opened again, focusing on Ethan with effort. Tell her I loved her. In my own way, I loved her. That wasn't love, Curtis. That was possession, and it cost you everything. Curtis didn't respond. His breathing grew shallower, more labored. By the time Doc Patterson and Sheriff Henderson arrived with Grace, Curtis Mitchell was dead. The aftermath was messy but ultimately straightforward. Mrs. Chen's wound was serious but not life-threatening. Doc Patterson extracted the bullet and stitched her up, pronouncing that she'd make a full recovery. Curtis's death was ruled justifiable homicide, self-defense. The gun he'd carried was registered to him, and there were witnesses to his threats and his shooting of Mrs. Chen. In the end, Curtis Mitchell was buried in McGill's cemetery, in an unmarked grave. No one came to mourn him. His family in Salt Lake City wanted nothing to do with the scandal, and he'd made no friends during his time in Nevada. Grace was shaken but relieved. It's really over, she said to Ethan that night, lying in bed with his hand on her pregnant belly. He can't hurt me anymore. He can't hurt anyone anymore. How do you feel about it? His death. She was quiet for a long moment. I should feel guilty, shouldn't I? He was my husband, even if the marriage was annulled. But all I feel is relief and gratitude to Mrs. Chen for saving our lives. Me too. That woman's a hero, she is, and I don't know how we'll ever repay her. She doesn't want repayment. She wants what she's always wanted, to be part of a family, and that's what we are now. You, me, Mrs. Chen, the baby, we're a family. Grace smiled, that beautiful smile that still made Ethan's heart skip. Yes, we are. Their son was born on a warm June morning in 1879. Grace's labor was long and difficult, but Doc Patterson was there every step of the way, and when the baby finally arrived, healthy and screaming, Ethan wept with relief and joy. They named him Samuel, after Ethan's father. Samuel Rourke came into the world with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the moment Ethan held him, he knew his life would never be the same. Grace recovered quickly, her strength surprising everyone. She'd been afraid of childbirth after what happened to Sarah, but her fear had been unfounded. She was strong and healthy, and their son thrived. Mrs. Chen appointed herself the baby's honorary grandmother, fussing over him and spoiling him shamelessly. The older woman had recovered from her gunshot wound, though she'd carry a scar for the rest of her life. She wore it proudly, she told them, a reminder that she'd protected her family when they needed her most. Life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan worked the ranch, expanding his operation with the help of permanent hands. Grace balanced motherhood with her dressmaking business, teaching sewing classes when she had time. They built additions onto the house, adding more bedrooms for the children they planned to have. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Emily, then another son, James. Their family grew, their love deepened. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the county. Years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. They faced the challenges that came their way together as partners: droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and difficult foaling. But they also celebrated the good times. First words and first steps, school plays and graduation ceremonies, weddings for their children and eventually grandchildren. Grace never lost the smile she'd found at Ethan's ranch. She laughed easily, loved fiercely, and built a life that was entirely her own. She never let Curtis's memory darken her days, though sometimes, in quiet moments, Ethan would catch her staring into the distance, and he knew she was remembering. "What are you thinking about?" he'd ask. "How lucky I am. That I found the courage to run, that I ended up at your ranch. That you saw me, really saw me, and loved me anyway." "There was no anyway about it. I loved you because of who you are, not in spite of it." They grew old together on that ranch, watching the world change around them. Nevada became a state, the railroad brought more people west, and the wild frontier they'd known slowly transformed into something more settled and civilized. But their love never changed. It remained constant through all the years, a foundation they could always rely on. And when people asked Grace about her life, about how she'd ended up on a remote Nevada ranch married to a man who'd given her everything, she always smiled and said the same thing. "He told me I didn't have to pretend. And for the first time in my life, I believed someone when they said I was safe." Everything else came from that. On Ethan's 65th birthday, they sat on the porch swing where he'd proposed, watching the sun set over land they'd worked together for decades. Their children were grown, scattered across the West with families of their own. But they'd all be coming home soon for a big family gathering, and the house would be full of life and laughter again. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked, her head on his shoulder. "Taking me in, all the trouble I brought to your door." Ethan pulled her closer. "Not for a single second. You gave me back my life, Grace. After Sarah died, I was just existing, going through the motions. But you reminded me what it was like to really live, to love, to hope for the future. You gave me a family, a purpose, everything that matters. We gave each other those things. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Then I'd say we're even." Grace laughed. "I'd say we're blessed." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Ethan was reminded of that first night Grace had told him she loved him. So much had changed since then. So much had been built and grown and created, but the essence of them, of what they were to each other, had remained the same. Love, respect, partnership, freedom and safety. The simple joy of being seen and accepted exactly as you were. That was what they'd given each other all those years ago, and what they continued to give each other every day. As the last light faded from the sky, Ethan turned to Grace and kissed her, soft and gentle, a promise renewed. She smiled against his lips, that smile he'd worked so hard to coax out of her decades ago, the smile that had never stopped making his heart skip a beat. "I love you, Grace Rourke." "I love you too, Ethan. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." And that was the truth that carried them through all the years that followed, through every joy and every sorrow, every triumph and every challenge. They faced it all together. Two people who'd been broken and lonely, who'd found each other in the vast Nevada desert and built something beautiful from their pain. Their love was a testament to the power of kindness, of seeing someone truly and loving them not despite their scars, but because of everything that made them who they were. It was a reminder that the greatest courage sometimes comes from the simple act of being vulnerable, of letting someone in after you've built walls to keep the world out. And as they grew older together, surrounded by the family they'd created and the life they'd built, they knew beyond any doubt that taking that chance, risking their hearts after so much pain, had been the best decision either of them had ever made. They had found their happily ever after, not in spite of their pasts, but because they'd been brave enough to build a future together. And that made all the difference.